Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two of our favourite guests. Firstly, from the SNP Socialist Group, Chris McCusker. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm feeling very distinguished, Kenneth. Thank you.
Excellent. And on the other side, we have writer and academic Effie Samara. Effie, how are you doing?
I'm well. I think I might be responsible for Chris's distinguished feelings this evening. I've got to take the credit for that. I'm good, Kenny. Thank you.
I was going to say you're taking the blame for it, but fair enough. We start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 438,257 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 418,800 were confirmed negative, 19,457 were positive. There are 50 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today. There was also one death reported today, but this is not a death that happened in the last 24 hours. This is from a test back in April that has only just kind of found its way into the reporting. So this is just an update, really. Of course, this is an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. Although again, as always, we urge you, if you are showing symptoms of any kind, please book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, 248 were in hospital last night, 2 of whom were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,492. This number only includes those who died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 41,397 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 16 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And it is Wednesday, so we also have the weekly report from National Records of Scotland for the week ending 16th of August, which was week 33 of the year. This week, a total of 3 people died in Scotland where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate. This takes the total number of deaths in Scotland linked to COVID-19 to 4,216. This is the lowest weekly total, though, since the beginning of the pandemic. The number reported by NRS is the most complete count of deaths available, as it includes all deaths where COVID-19 is listed on the death certificate as a contributing factor, not just those who have died in hospital following a positive test. That's the count for that other number that we've been repeating every day. But before we go on, I just want to remind you, if you want to be a part of the conversation here on Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so. You can tweet at us. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and use the hashtag Scotland@7. That's hashtag Scotland80 and the number 7. As you can see there, we will be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show. But we start today in Aberdeen, and First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said it was not yet safe to lift additional COVID-19 restrictions in Aberdeen following an outbreak there, but that the situation in the city was improving. While the situation is undoubtedly improving, and I don't want to lose sight of that point, we are not yet in a position to say that this outbreak is over or completely under control, Sturgeon said. She said she hoped some of the additional restrictions imposed on the city could begin being lifted next Wednesday. So, Effie, I'll come to you first on this. Aberdeen has been under these additional restrictions for a couple of weeks now. Do you think this is warranted by the Scottish Government to say that for the next week or so at least, we'll just keep things in place and see how they play out?
Well, Kenny, this is a matter of life and death. So I absolutely feel that it is warranted. In fact, as we all know, when the first decisions were made on beginning to lift lockdown, some of us were skeptical. Some of us thought things were going a little bit too fast in terms of opening, pubs and restaurants. Thankfully, we haven't seen a huge surge, so things are under control. But yes, I'm very supportive of the decision. I know there have been local protests and some People have come forward and have expressed themselves very negatively in regards to this. Obviously, Aberdeen is host to a huge amount of the hospitality industry, and it's a very popular resort. So people are worried. And I'm sure it will have some kind of impact on, the local job numbers and issues of that nature. But let us not forget, things are good. Things seem to be under control. NHS Scotland have shown themselves to be an exemplar of really, across these aisles, in acting positively and in protecting the public. So if that needs to happen, a few more days to ensure that cases remain under control and track and trace can do its job, I think it is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, we heard just recently that the Test and Protect program has traced 99.7% of all contacts, which does suggest that where these outbreaks are happening, we are getting on top of them. As far as Aberdeen goes, the council, a Labour-Tory coalition in Aberdeen, has kind of expressed quite a lot of anger about this. They felt that they weren't consulted properly, and they feel that this is going to do, untold damage to the economy of Aberdeen. Do you think the Scottish Government needs to discuss these things more with the councils when they're making these decisions?
I would hesitate to say yes, they should discuss more with the councils. However, at the end of the day, the councils have got what would you say? They've got the feel on the ground at this moment in time. But by the same token, the First Minister is doing the best for the country, not just for one city. That was foretold when we had the small outbreak in Dumfries and Galloway. There was no clamours for extra mitigation. So I mean, these are just individual clusters. It might be Falkirk next. It might be Ayrshire next. Who knows? I mean, God hoping it's not. But I don't think that one city should get special treatment over another.
Well, no, and we do obviously wish the best to our friends in Aberdeen. We hope that by next Wednesday things have eased up and you can get back to something closer to normal. But we move on now, and Scotland's GDP increased by 5.7% in June, according to statistics announced today by the Chief Statistician. The growth in the latest month follows an increase of 2.3% in May and falls of 19.2% in April and 5.8% in March. Although output has increased for the last 2 months, it remains 17.6% below the level in February, prior to the direct impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. In June, there has been a wider pickup in activity than in May, with output increasing in all the main industry sectors and in most of the subsectors within these. For quarter two as a whole, that's April to June, GDP is provisionally estimated to have fallen by 19.7% compared to quarter one, which is January to March, after a fall of 2.5% in quarter one. Across the 2 quarters, output is estimated to have fallen by a total of 21.7% compared to the last quarter of 2019. This is the third release of new monthly GDP statistics for Scotland and the first to include a provisional estimate for the whole quarter. These statistics have been produced by the Scottish Government to help track the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and are badged as experimental statistics, which means they are still in development. So Chris, on this one, I'll come to you first. We know, obviously, that the economy has taken a hit here. How useful do you think these monthly measures of the change in GDP are when we're still at a stage where there's so much of the economy that can't be open? It's not really comparing like with like to compare this with how things were before lockdown began.
Well, it's not, no, but that's the way that the city like to behave, and the British mainstream media will be bringing their hands at this. This is welcome news for them. That you know that for by the fact that we're dealing with a pandemic that has officially seen the whole of the UK in a recession, the biggest recession in 11 years. They will centre it solely on Scotland because anything that Scotland does is like crap. You never heard the tweet that I put out today about Prestwick Airport now actually turning a profit, owned by the Scottish Government, and to which Dr. Philippa Whitford retweeted that by saying, "Oh, isn't it just wonderful that the Scottish Government are supporting a business that is, it's wealth and freight work, as well as passenger work as well. It's a success story, but you won't hear that ever repeated on the mainstream media. You'll only hear the negatives, and that's what they want to do. They want to report on the negatives, and and not even put a hand up and mention it."
Yeah, well, that's why we have broadcast in Scotland, isn't it, Chris? But I'll turn to Effie now. Effie, we've been talking on the show for a long time about the idea of well-being economics. Do you think maybe it's time for the chief statistician for Scotland to be looking at some of those types of metrics, measuring our health and our well-being, rather than measuring our GDP now?
It would be a good time to start. It's been neglected for long enough, and it has caused an innumerable number of people an incalculable amount of damage. Being the consumer-led metric, what is widely known as the ultra-capitalist metric, where growth, which bears no relation to human happiness, is the only indicator of goodness, in inverted commas. We've had this long enough, and it has caused untold damage across most strata of the population, with the exception of a very, very small slice who enjoy, most of them, inherited wealth, in my humble opinion, not earned at all. So this is the time, and also in academia, if I may just contribute this small point, especially within social science and economics, in the last 3 or 4 months, there's been a huge, almost like a groundswell, almost like an urge for academics to look away from traditional economics and consider other ways and other forms of happiness. So well-being is obviously a huge subject, as you've had Catherine Trebek on the show, and others very, very important economists and others, and you've had these matters analysed. I look at it from a slightly more artistic point of view, and within the social science. But this is the time because health is now paramount, and also because certain sections of the population, of the working population, that we have always taken for granted as being a very silent group of people. For example, healthcare workers, people working in the food supply, delivery people, care workers, all of these people we have taken for granted for far too long. And we have almost neglected their existence. The Anglosphere is very good at neglecting their existence because, as we've discussed, we moralize about poverty and we moralize about wealth, and we almost pretend that if you're wealthy, you're good, and if you're poor, that's you've done something wrong. Now, we know COVID has shown us that it's actually the opposite. If you're poor, chances are it's because you're not allowed by social structures to do anything to contribute to your happiness. So changing the metric, and maybe even trying to put in place some determinants and variants which are concrete, and specific in order to enable both academia, but also the formal economists of the state to begin to look away from consumption, away from production, and into other areas, because this is a huge subject that, especially with climate change, with the added concern of climate change, is going to influence our life over the next decade. So this is a good time to start.
Absolutely. Well, we move on now to another economic story. And negotiators for the European Union and the UK began a 7th round of talks today to reach a post-Brexit deal on all aspects of future relations, from trade to security, though diplomats said a deal was still weeks away at the earliest. UK Chief Negotiator David Frost and his EU counterpart Michel Barnier dined together yesterday ahead of the talks, which have snagged on the issues of fishing rights in British waters and ensuring state aid preserves fair competition. The state aid part of the level playing field and fisheries remain the main hurdles. If this moves, everything else will fall into place, said an EU diplomat. This round should not bring major breakthroughs. Eyes are on the last one in September. EU sources have repeatedly warned that a deal must be concluded by October to ensure it is ratified before the end of the transition period on December 31st. So we're back at the negotiating table again, Effie. Is this one going to make much difference? We've heard there that it's not going to be, the deal isn't going to be agreed at this round, but do you think there is still room for progress?
Listen, Kenny, we know what's going on here. You have a man at the helm. You have a man commandeering a country called Boris Johnson, who is literally, I'm not going to use the word that's sort of coming to mind right now, but this is somebody who's basically disappeared. So he was elected prime minister, which was the ambition of a lifetime, and nobody knows where he is. So we've checked the fridges, the freezers. He's nowhere to be seen. And he's supposedly in Scotland. Other people are telling me that he's in Greece getting married. Other people are telling me that. Obviously, comedy aside, there are quarters within the civil service and the UK government who are fully aware of the devastation and the catastrophe that will be caused, even starting with very basic things like food supplies, pharmaceuticals. Dr. Whitford has spoken at length on this program about isotopes, about supplies for diabetes and other urgent medications. I will contribute with my zero medical knowledge to things like dermatology, skin supply for things like burns, things that have very, very little shelf life, so you cannot store them. And all of this supply chain depended on this 24-hour constant flow of products and goods and services across the sea. Now, we're looking at a situation where potentially this could be interrupted on New Year's Day. This will cause absolute devastation. We're looking at the county of Kent becoming an enormous, lorry park. Now, none of this is going to resolve it. And you have Boris Johnson, who could not care two hoots about any of this. You also have Cummings with his different motivations and people who control his ideas and his actions. And you do have some people within the civil service, I do believe that, who are absolutely petrified. So I think that from the UK side, there will never be a coherent response because nobody cares. There will, however, be some kind of maybe last minute, really bad attempt at a deal simply to stop calamity. Whether this is going to be received by Brussels in a way that, they would be, I think, within their rights to simply say, right, that's it, see ya, whether they also themselves from their end, they are very concerned. Nobody wants a no deal. Nobody wants a situation where things are not, there's no flow of things, that people can't cross the borders, travellers or what have you. Also, people UK residents within the EU, that's going to be another big kerfuffle. There is no seriousness from the UK side. There is no evidence of that. I think there will be probably a last-minute attempt, whether it succeeds or not. Whatever happens, whether there is a deal or not, a deal will be a bad deal. Compared to what we have, it will be inconceivably bad. So it remains to be seen, obviously, in late October, but I'm not holding my breath.
Sure. Well, we move on, and still looking across the channel, a Sudanese teenager who disappeared at sea has been found dead on a beach near Calais, prompting increased criticism of the UK government's treatment of migrants. The 16-year-old was found on the beach of Sangatte, the former site of a refugee camp, earlier this morning. Philippe Sabatier, the deputy prosecutor of Boulogne-sur-Mer, told reporters the dead child was yet to be identified, but was understood to be linked to another young Sudanese boy who was rescued at sea and reported his companion missing. The pair had attempted to make the crossing in a dinghy. The tragedy comes as the number of people risking their lives by crossing the channel, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, hits record highs, with more than 4,300 arrivals so far this year, more than double the total in the whole of 2019. The UK government has been criticised by campaigners and opposition politicians for its alleged lack of compassion and competence in tackling the issues, ignoring calls from humanitarian experts to bolster safe and legal routes to the UK for those seeking asylum. Instead, ministers have sought to bring in the military to make the route unviable, which has involved the RAF launching large aircraft over the waters. Chris, obviously this is a tragedy when anyone dies, especially a 16-year-old boy, but in the context of how the UK has been responding to this increased flow of migrants, it's really horrific, isn't it?
Well, again, Kenny, the first thought that came into my mind, I can't actually repeat it on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm speaking with my refugee hat on here as a humanitarian aid worker for Eastwood Refugee Aid. We have visited the site at Sangatte on numerous occasions, as well as the former camp at Dunkirk, and also the jungle before it was actually ripped up. And this is... To me, this is just horrendous, but it's not an isolated case. Sadly, there have been deaths before at Sangatte of refugees, but they were never reported. And the people that we work with, Care for Calais, my friend Claire Mosley, said that she was absolutely devastated at this unnecessary death of a child. And honestly, it is, again, I just can't hold my contempt for the British government and also the French government as well, because at the end of the day, they're not exactly covering themselves in glory with this issue. Refugees are getting moved on a nightly basis. Any tents or sleeping bags that Care for Calais give to the refugees for, just sheer shelter, the police are actually slashing them, and then they're rendered useless. Some of them hold on to them and they get pieces of tarpaulin that they've found on waste ground. It's absolutely horrendous. The refugees are not allowed to go into the shops. The police have actually reduced to a tactic of taking one shoe off of them, so that the shop owners can easily recognise a refugee if they've got odd shoes on. And they rely heavily on the aid that Care for Calais give on a daily basis. That's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And, the situation with COVID at the moment, myself and my colleagues Ron McKechnie and Colin Skinner, we've not been able to go out. Obviously, this year we normally go out at least 3 times or 4 times a year. So we're desperate to go back out because the first time we went out, we took 14 vans over, full of donations from the people of East Renfrewshire, the people of Glasgow, people of Paisley, you name it. Donations came in left, right, and centre. And if we can get to that stage again where we're able to help and support these people, because make no mistake, and I have to point this out, that these people are not just wasters. I've met doctors over there, I've met nurses over there, I've met chartered surveyors, mechanics, bakers, you name it. All these people have got skills, and you're not going to turn around and tell me that they have given up their life, wherever they lived, whether it be Syria or Libya or Lebanon or wherever. They've not given up their life in the sole pursuit of coming over to Britain to live off of £37.75 a week. So, the right-wing media will tell you that they're trying to steal benefits, but they're really not trying to steal benefits. They're trying to actually have a life, because the British government have been complicit in bombing the Donald Duck out of their countries. If they would stop bombing their countries, they would stop arriving in France, that's for sure.
Well, that's the firebrand side of Chris there. Though, Effie, I'll turn to you here. What do you think is the reason why, when most of the world just now is being told don't travel unless you have to, we have seen this spike in numbers? I mean, it's not huge numbers. 4,000 people once they're dispersed around the UK is nothing. But it is still interesting that we've seen this spike in numbers during the pandemic. What do you think might be driving that?
Well, I think the situation in France, as Chris mentioned, is also quite precarious in regards to refugees and asylum seekers. There is definitely not as much provision as there is in other European countries, and I will mention Germany, for example. In France, the far-right movement has considerable traction. So the French government is always quite attentive, and if you like, people have their ears inflected and turned in that direction, and they are prepared to listen to people like Marie Le Pen, who are funded by the Kremlin, and Steve Bannon, who is her personal friend, to promote and perpetuate this kind of ideology. So it's inevitable that the French government will attempt to reflect this kind of sentiment, which is wrong. In terms of COVID, I am not sure of this, but I believe there are provisions have tightened overall. So if there might have been, Chris's description had me totally engrossed. I've never been to Calais, so I have read countless testimonies of people, but I have never actually myself been there. So it's I don't know if whatever small provision was made for asylum seekers and refugees again was possibly stopped or reduced due to COVID. So whether this forced some people to attempt to cross the water, this could have been one thing that might have influenced their thinking. But as you said, 4,000 people, considering this is a country of 65 million people, and as Chris so eloquently said, especially the Syrians, people with whom I've worked under the UNESCO chair, these people are doctors, they're teachers, they're surveyors, they're engineers. So these people would be welcomed in any society because they would have so much to contribute. And if you have a life of a professional person in any country, you don't simply abandon that life to come here for £30 or £40 a week. Anyone who believes this really needs their head examined. But obviously, we have a huge section of the press which is controlled by the Barclay brothers and Murdoch. And I would include the BBC in that. I would be disinclined maybe to do that, say, 4 or 5 years ago. I was still holding my breath and hoping that I wouldn't include them. But right now they are sort of getting worse, and giving people like Nigel Farage more and more of a platform, which is despicable. So when you have that, you will get tragedies like this. It's horrible. My thoughts tonight are obviously with the mother that birthed this child. I cannot even imagine. I don't even know that she knows about this. But I mean, God give them strength, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I can say is Nigel Farage is not likely to be seen on Broadcasting Scotland anytime soon. We move on though, and in the United States, the Democratic Party formally nominated Joe Biden for president last night, vowing that his election would repair a pandemic-battered America and put an end to the chaos that has defined Republican President Donald Trump's administration. The second night of the party's four-night national convention under the theme Leadership Matters featured elder statesmen like former Presidents Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, rising stars of the Democratic Party, as well as prominent Republicans who made the case that Biden would return integrity to the White House and normalcy to American lives. Biden's choice for Vice President, Senator Kamala Harris of California, will make her keynote speech tonight. It's Chris, I'll turn to you first. Joe Biden...
There is no status quo. It's...
Sorry, we get running a wee bit of video there a wee bit early. We will get to that story shortly. But Chris, I'll come to you here. Is Joe Biden the right man to defeat Donald Trump and return normalcy to America?
Slow Joe. I think we spoke at length, maybe about 6 or 8 months ago, on American politics, Kenny, when we were discussing Bernie Sanders and the possibility of a smidgen of socialism returning into American society. I think we did see a smidgen of socialism in the Obama administration. But we know that Donald Trump hates socialism with a vengeance. Is this the right person to deliver a soup song of socialism, which could actually go a long way in American politics at this moment in time? You only have to think of the Medicare issue. You see that the economy is obviously struggling, the same as every economy, all across the world. You would really hope that the American public would actually welcome a fresh broom, somebody who is completely untainted, unless somebody drags some skeleton out of the cupboard, which I highly doubt. But they have got the chance to embrace an untainted state of politics. And it's very similar actually to the situation that we're in the UK at this moment in time, because every day the lies and the obfuscation is unravelling at an alarming rate. And as Effie quite rightly pointed out, the Prime Minister's buggered off. Nobody knows where he is. It was news to me that he was in Greece. I was told he was in St Andrews, so who knows? But what we do see now is with and I think hopefully we're going to touch on this later on, but the new stats out on independence. That people are actually thinking, well, look, there is another way to do this. Hopefully the American people will have a look at their situation and say, well, look, there is another way of doing, politics in America.
Yeah, that election, of course, happens in the beginning of November, assuming, of course, that Donald Trump doesn't get to delay it the way he has said he would like to. Move on to another election, though, and the EU has said it does not recognise Alexander Lukashenko as Belarus's president and vowed to press ahead with sanctions on his regime, following an emergency summit in response to 10 days of protests that have shaken the dictator's 26-year grip on power. The European Union stands in solidarity with the people of Belarus, said Charles Michel, the European Council president, who convened the last-minute meeting of the EU's 27 leaders. Belarus's presidential elections had been neither free nor fair and did not meet international standards, he said. We don't recognise the results presented by the Belarus authorities. Angela Merkel said, the people in Belarus know what they want. That's why we want an independent path for Belarus where the political conditions are decided by the country itself. The German Chancellor also revealed that Lukashenko had rejected a phone call with her. Expressing her regret, Merkel said, you can only mediate when you are in touch with all sides. Now, Effie, the EU has stopped short of recognising Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as the president. They've called for discussions, some sort of managed exit for Lukashenko and some possibly new elections to have a free and fair run at getting a new president. Do you think this pressure from the EU will make much difference to Belarus?
Well, what's very upsetting about Belarus at the moment is the fact that he is, as is the first instinct usually of dictators, he is militarizing his presence, increasingly militarizing his presence as the days go on and trying to cling on to whatever power he has. So, you know, we've got all these, the scenes coming out of Belarus, which are, some of them are pretty horrific. We've got riot police, we've had reports of rapes, we've had the reports of violence and protest and molestation. I'm just reading off the latest here that's just come through on one of the reports from Belarus, and I think what will happen now, obviously he will try to cling on to something, but the EU, what's amazing about the EU is that they have this huge power, especially with Germany taking a very specific and clear stance against him. She has made an attempt to take a phone call. He has refused the phone call. And also Svetlana's a brilliant contribution to this debate and her resilience in despite what could be her personal safety is at risk here. We're talking about Lukashenko. This man is dangerous, but she has not given up. So that very powerful female voice, and I also believe that the collective action from Brussels is going to play a huge role in hopefully ensuring some sort of resolution to this, but I don't think it's going to happen automatically. There will be some sort of there'll be developments. Hopefully, not too much violence. Although I foresee maybe some violence to come as well. But he's a dangerous man, and I think it was a good move.
Yeah. We will obviously keep you updated on all the developments from Belarus as we get them. But back in Scotland now, a new plan to remobilise NHS cancer care is to put the experience of patients at its heart. It will focus on improving services and ensuring that all patients have access to the best possible treatments. The coronavirus pandemic has resulted in significant changes to service delivery, as well as delays in some diagnostic processes and alterations to treatment plans and patient support. The recovery plan will be led by clinical leaders and specialty advisors and will align with the NHS Remobilise, Recover and Redesign framework. New positive measures used in response to COVID-19 will be maintained. They include more use of video technology, nationally consistent approaches to prioritisation, innovative triage techniques and quicker decision-making in new treatment options. Chris, in my experience, oncology in the NHS is a really good service. Even during the pandemic, I've had to be up at the Beatson once I've had a couple of phone appointments, and they've been really, really good. Do you think there is a need for this kind of national plan to get the whole system back on its feet after the pandemic is cleared up a bit?
Well, I think there's a general need to get the whole of the NHS back up and running after COVID, if and when we can do it. I think that the Scottish Government are taking a softly approach to try and slowly open up departments again. But in doing so, they're obviously prioritising. And cancer has been cancer itself has been a blight on the Scottish society for the best part of 100 years, so it's only right that they start with, shall we say, one of the biggies. Scotland has always striven, to my mind, to support cancer patients as much as possible. This is obviously, and I'm speaking as a confirmed smoker, that Scotland has always been seen as the poor man of Europe, just because of living conditions, because of people's choice of morality, their choice or non-choice and leisure activities and stuff like that. So, I've always maintained that, the one of the main priorities of the Scottish Government, the First Minister, and it was as well when Alex Salmond was in charge, that the hospitals, healthcare, schools, and the general economy has always been at the forefront of everything that they do. So again, as I say, slowly opening up the actual hospital system can only be a good thing, because there are people in society that obviously still need these treatments. Some of them at some point in time are actually quite life-threatening. So the sooner they can do it, the better.
Yeah. And just on the point of referring to Scotland as the sick man of Europe, I have a friend who works at the Glasgow Centre for Population Health who says that we're not supposed to call it the Glasgow effect anymore because it's not a mystery anymore. We do know that part of the reason for Scotland's lowered life expectancy since 1979 was, according to research by Dr. Jerry McCartney, political attack by the Thatcher government. And the Glasgow effect is in large part due to decisions made by successive Labour governments to abandon people in Glasgow to their fate. That's research from Glasgow Centre for Population Health. Blame them, not me, for that if you happen to be a supporter of successive Labour councils in Glasgow. Well, we move on to our final story of the day, and a new poll shows that the 2014 referendum result may have been turned on its head, as 55% of voters said they would vote yes in a new referendum. The poll, conducted by Panelbase for Business for Scotland, shows that even with don't knows included, yes still holds an absolute majority of 51%, against 42% for no and 7% undecided. This is the fourth poll in recent months to show a lead for yes. Gordon McIntyre Kemp, CEO of Business for Scotland, welcomed the poll result and said, "The reversal of the 2014 result is a huge landmark. 55% yes will send shockwaves throughout the political world. There is no conclusion to draw from this new set of data other than the writing is very definitely on the wall for the Union." The poll surveyed 1,011 voters in Scotland aged over 16 between the 12th and 18th of August. And meanwhile, a second poll by Comres, their first since at least 2014, was also published today, showing a 54 to 46% lead for yes. So Effie, I'm going to come to you first on this. This, obviously, it's symbolic more than anything else, building on top of these 54s and 53s that we've seen in a couple of other polls recently. But it does show that the decisive result of 2014 that we were told the 55 win for no was, it's reversed now. Does that mean that there is now a decisive majority in favour of yes?
I have no doubt about that, Kenny. There is, to my mind, the people that I see, and I'm talking mostly about actually, it's interesting because I will offer some anecdotal advice, some anecdotal information here. When I was lecturing, that was last term and the term before that at Glasgow Uni, the vast majority of Scots within my classes, I mean, I would have to struggle to think of one person, and I'm talking people between the ages of 17 to say about 35, undergraduates. I would struggle to think of one individual who would be a no voter. So demographically, to my mind, this is a fact. It's a given. It's a given. Now, the interesting, I think, what's been interesting at least in the last year, with Brexit becoming reality, but also with the tragedy of COVID, is that people who were termed as soft nose or undecided or whatever, they see the reality of this. And if anyone is willing to inform themselves, and as we know, Scots are very educated, they have access to internet, they will look stuff up, they are open. Of course, there's always going to be a 10-15% whose ears will be closed, but that, even that notwithstanding, people can see the reality of what's happening. And you see an administration in England, and this has been increasingly the case since 2016. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, this was very obvious even with the Cameron-Clegg coalition. This was a very right-wing, ideologically inflected government. A government that appoints Gove under the umbrella of Cummings and Theresa May as Home Secretary. I mean, there's no mysteries there. But people at the time, if you like, the economy was ticking over and things like that. So people were not as aware of it. Brexit and COVID has brought these things, has made these things very, very apparent. And they affect our lives in a way that is absolutely shocking to some people. And people can see the comparisons. People can see Norway. People can see other small countries. You've referred to the Faroe Islands. People can see New Zealand. People can see the Scandinavian countries. People can even see Malta and places like that. So this data is now obvious. Let's not forget what that 55% was in 2014. That was based on a campaign which was, to my mind, completely fraudulent. The Prime Minister of a country, David Cameron, for whom I have absolutely no respect, none. He's another one of those sort of, living in a bubble, son of the lords and the ladies, who was born to become Prime Minister and made a total salad of it. He basically declared. He sought to change the claim of right for Scotland. He said Scotland will lead, will be given extra powers. The devolution statement will be completely respected. It will be enhanced. It will be augmented. Your place in the European Union is assured. We will support you. Every single one of these conditions has been breached, brutally breached, and shamelessly breached. And whoever does not want to see this is willfully blind, and you can't do anything about that. And it's been a very short period of time. And what you've seen since the May government, which is another interesting development, is you've seen an increase in contempt for Scotland and for Northern Ireland, for the big Northern Irish question, or increase in contempt, almost to the point of insult. Mm-hmm. So people now openly coming out, BBC commentators and journalists coming out and say, but if you weren't part of the UK, you wouldn't get anything, and things like that. So, which is, again, an affront, a total lie. An independent country has its own fiscal policy and can raise its own finances. So you would get everything as an independent country. You would not be a beggar waiting for Rishi Sunak to tell you if he's going to extend furlough or not. Mm. So people are aware of this. this. And I think this is simply a reflection of that. I believe, and that's not wishful thinking, as you know, I'm very critical of the independence movement, although a firm supporter of it. I'm very critical of decisions and government policy, and I try to see it with a clear eye. Now, I think the 55% is an underestimate, but we'll be here on the night of the referendum, and we'll talk about it.
No doubt. Chris, today we had another All Under One Banner event, this one at Bannockburn. Sadly, we weren't joined by you to give a few words this time. You were at the Holyrood one. What do you think the effect of these events, small as they are during restrictions on mass gatherings and so on, what kind of impact do you think things like these All Under One Banner events have?
Well, it keeps all under one banner relevant. It keeps us in the public eye, and it also goes a long way to reassure the activists who, in the past, last year, year before that. That they have not gone away, and they will be there once COVID is over and done with. And we see the numbers that we got last year in Glasgow. It was, reports between 85 and 125,000 marching through Glasgow. And these reports are always dumbed down by the BBC and the other right-wing media outlets. But I was wanting to actually bring the viewers' attention to my Twitter feed. I put up that as of the 3rd of August 2020, anyone, and I mean anyone, over the age of 16 living in Scotland will be able to vote in the local elections and the Scottish Parliament elections, regardless of where you were born. Mm-hmm. That means, we do not deny anybody a vote. If you live in Scotland, you are Scottish, regardless of your race, colour, or creed. You are a valuable part of Scottish society, and your vote counts. And I'm not just saying a yes vote counts. A democratic vote counts. Mm-hmm. And that has to be pointed out, that we're not denying people who are old enough to go out and fight in a war. We're not denying them of their democratic right to vote, regardless of the fact that that we could be sending them to their death.
Absolutely.
So this is a democratic process which is there for everybody in Scotland, and I do believe that because of the past, shall we say, indiscretions of the Westminster government, I do believe that the people of Scotland who were duped in 2014. I'm not going to say they were stupid. I'm just going to say that they were easily duped. And they are smart people, and they are now seeing exactly how the Westminster government have treated Scotland since 2014. And, the end is nigh for the Union. The end is nigh.
Well, at the All Under One Banner march, or event rather, it wasn't a march, static demo, Leslie Riddick was the kind of keynote speaker. She spoke about land reform. This was one of the things that the event was focused on. But in amongst that speech, she did mention things like expanding democracy, expanding the right to vote. It's a very interesting speech, so we are going to play you out with that. But just before we do, I'll just very quickly remind you, do follow us on Twitter, Facebook, subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you can. And as well, if you're able to support us financially, then you can always go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up there as a supporter. It's what makes us able to pay the fuel bills to be able to drive out to Bannockburn as we did today. So we are going to just play you out with that. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to Effie and to Chris for joining me here in the studio. And Gordon will be back again tomorrow with another Scotland at 7. So until then, here's Leslie Riddick, and have a great evening. Good night.
There is no status quo. It's Scotland's time to go. There is no status quo. It's time to go.
Here we are at Bannockburn. It's the site of a famous battle in the quest for Scottish independence as a kingdom. And I'm not knocking the big man, especially when he's got such an able advocate standing to my right. But already by the time this battle happened, feudalism had crept into Scotland like a virus. And what did that mean? It meant hierarchy. It meant one big chiel that was never there that owned you. It meant a whole stack of other chiels that were also in the pecking order. It meant a hand on your shoulder. It meant you learning to be a second-class citizen who would never, ever, ever own land in your own right. And that has singled us out in Northern Europe. We are weird. And we were weird from this moment onward, sad to say. Now, it would be strange if I went more than a couple of minutes without mentioning Norway. But it serves as a great comparator, because the Norwegians were lucky enough not to have feudalism. In fact, they formally abolished what was left of it. They abolished nobility in the 1820s. I often feel we should just have a wee round of applause for that. Good idea. And very good idea for a country to think about. Who plays host to the 37 dukes that exist in Britain. They all own land somewhere in Scotland. That's what we've become. But in Norway, the importance of land ownership, it's obvious when you look at your history. Because who were the folk that got the first right to vote? They were the folk who owned land. So when the Norwegians had a new constitution in 1814, and it's only a wee history lesson, my wee doggy friend here, because he's already getting bored of it. In 1814, all men over the age of 25 that owned any kind of land in Norway got the right to vote. And overnight in 1814, that meant 45% of those men could vote. 1814. Did that change the face of Norway? You bet it did. Because very rapidly the parliament they had became called contemptuously the peasants' parliament. Because it was the people that ran the land, the people that decided to outlaw nobility, the people that decided they would be a municipal kind of country not run by Oslo, the people who eventually decided that they would take back ownership of their rivers because British industrialists had been in and bought them all up. So that's what you do when you get a wide franchise early doors. You create a vibrant democracy whose people have the confidence when the moment comes to snatch the ability to go for independence. In 1905, when the Norwegians finally went for it and they had a referendum, it was 322,000 yes, 184 no. And that was even without women voting, who organised their own vote, the suffragettes. Exactly the same result. What gave them that confidence when they were to become the second poorest nation in Europe on their own? It was because they were already running their lives. It was because they knew what it was to own land and be confident and secure. And what was happening here? Well, look at our Reform Act of 1832, laughably described as the Great Reform Act. It had exactly the same clause in it. It gave the vote to men over 25 who owned land. In Norway, remember, that got 45% of those guys the vote. In Britain, 5%. In Scotland, 2.8%. Think about that. That thin democracy that has ensued is one that has characterised the whole of Britain and plagued it since. Because you don't need to be a democracy with that few people voting. You can be an elite. You can sit in London. You can tell people what to do and they jump. And this is what we want to quit. This is what we have to quit. So the business of who owns land is a reflection of who has the right to decide the future of a country. It's hobbled our confidence for centuries. And I know that firsthand because I've been involved in lots of the community buyouts, particularly the Isle of Egg, where I was a trustee for 8 years. And watching people overcome that inner negative voice. You can't do it, you can't do it, you can't, who do you think you are? Where does that come from? In a country as rich as resources as this one, where does that come from? That comes from the knowledge you are not fit to own any part of this fabulous land. So it has to change. And I hope it will change. It's frustrating to see how slow things move, but you know, the whole business of devolution and why it's not enough is that it sets up a mindset of mitigation. What we do is mitigate structures that are unworkably unfair. So mitigation is the name of the game. It's not enough. We need to get to a situation where we just have the same kind of laws as every other social democracy in Northern Europe, because a social democracy is what Scotland has voted to be for the last 100 years, and it's generally got a Tory government in exchange. And the House of Lords, mentioning dear Ruth Davidson, the House of Lords was the one that blocked all sorts of reforms to land ownership in Scotland for centuries. So we've got a moment. We're beginning to unravel an awful lot of I-beams. We're beginning to pull apart things we've been told. We're beginning to understand that negative voice is not one to listen to. We're being inspired by the people who, despite all of that ringing in their ears, work together to move forward in a democratic and pioneering way in the world. So Scotland's destiny is to get that feeling back for all of us, that we must have the appetite to be able to get that little bit of land for ourselves and our children, to return to the normality that everyone else at this latitude enjoys. And I'm only roughly paraphrasing Norman McCaig, I think, when he asked that question in one of his brilliant poems. And he said, who owns this land? He who bought it, or I who am captivated by it? We all know the answer to that. Thank you.